And now I'll introduce our moderator for our panel on Housing and Transportation Solutions. Seamus Murphy is the Chief Communications Officer for Samtrans, Caltrain, and the San Mateo County Transportation Authority. Seamus is responsible for the district's external affairs, including community relations, policy advocacy, marketing, customer service, and media relations. And before joining the district, Murphy managed communication strategy and government affairs for several public and private sector organizations dealing with complex land use, transportation, and environmental issues. And Seamus is also on Sustainable San Mateo County's Board of Directors. So welcome, Seamus.
Thanks, Flora. We have some experts in their field who are going to help us navigate some of these issues and talk about some of the solutions that are out there and are being pursued. There are some good opportunities on the horizon for us to be able to make some progress when it comes to affordability in San Mateo County and transportation and housing issues generally. So why don't the three of you come on up and I'll introduce our panelists. We have first, Peggy Jensen, who is Deputy County Manager. She is the executive sponsor for the San Mateo County Home for All initiative, which grew out of the county's closing the Jobs Housing Gap Task Force. So some really relevant work being done in that area that Peggy is overseeing. In addition to working on housing issues, she also oversees the Office of Sustainability and is the county manager's liaison to the county health system and the county libraries. In addition to Peggy, we have Isabella Chu, who was born in Berkeley and grew up in rural Washington, made it back to Redwood City, and is now the founder for Redwood City Forward, and is really dealing with some of these issues on a grassroots level within a jurisdiction that has made a lot of progress, I think, on the issues that we're going to talk about today. But all of us understand that all of our jurisdictions have a long way to go. And then next to Isabella is Don Cecil. Don is working with SAMCETA as a part of the Peninsula Mobility Group to really tackle some of the transportation related challenges that we have around the county, working with the private sector to make sure that our private sector partners are invested in helping to accomplish some of these solutions. Don is going to talk more about that, and Don, aside from the work that he does with SAMCETA, manages the MC2 Public Affairs consulting firm. MC2 has clients from the public sector, private sector, and helps to facilitate and advance a lot of the major efforts and initiatives coming out of the public sector and private sector, dealing with a variety of different issues and challenges facing the county and the region. So if I can just sort of open things up and maybe starting with you, Peggy, if you could tell us a little bit more about Homes for All and the work that you're doing with Homes for All, and maybe some of the innovative solutions that are emerging as a part of that effort.
Thank you very much, Seamus, and thank you also to Sustainable San Mateo County for hosting us today on this very important topic. Just a little bit about Home for All. About 2 years ago, the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors convened a Closing the Jobs Housing Gap Task Force. That task force met for a year, and instead of producing a report for binder that was going to sit on a shelf, they decided that what they really wanted to do was put forward an action plan. And the concept of Home for All was part of that action plan. Home for All is it's an initiative focused on, you saw that equation actually that Flora pointed, that we've had many more jobs created in San Mateo County than housing units. How do we close that gap? How do we address that supply and demand problem? And Home for All is around promoting development of all types of housing at all price points, ranging from home sharing to second units, transit-oriented development, affordable housing, and market rate housing units. One of the things that, Seamus, I think you asked is, have there been some specific initiatives that have come out of Home for All? And I'd like to share a couple of them with you. When the task force was meeting, they identified the 54 members who represented a variety of different stakeholders, different groups. Every city was at the table, business community, nonprofits, advocacy community. Those folks, after meeting for a year, identified 3 specific areas that were challenges to the development of housing. Those areas were providing land, available land, funding for affordable housing, and then community support for housing development. And I'd like to highlight a couple things that we've been working on at Home for All to address each of those areas. In terms of land, Flora talked about how the community college districts in San Mateo have built housing for their staff on their properties. We've been contacted and are working through our 21 Elements program with a variety of school districts, both elementary and high school districts in San Mateo County, who are looking at developing workforce housing on their property. In addition to that, the Board of Supervisors budget proposed, which will be considered later this month by the board, includes a $5 million allocation to HEART, our regional housing trust. That $5 million will be used to establish a revolving loan fund for school districts that want to develop workforce housing. In addition to the funding for the HEART program, the task force members also wanted the county to pursue a bond issue dedicated to housing. As you all may know, both Santa Clara and Alameda counties had bond issues on their ballots last November, both of which I'm pleased to say passed. Unfortunately, in San Mateo County, our polling indicated that there was not support for a bond measure. But what the board did choose to do, as you all may be aware, is extend our half-cent sales tax measure, extend Measure A, which now has become Measure K, for another 20 years. On May 16th, the board held a study session to decide how much money in our next 2-year budget out of that new Measure K funding that they would allocate to housing, and they've set aside just over $40 million over the next 2 years for affordable housing development and other housing-related problems. That represents 25% of all the Measure K money, and also is a significant increase in terms of the amount of Measure A money that had been devoted to housing over the past 2 years. And I would like to add that with that funding, our Department of Housing, who's well represented in the back of the room, feels that we will probably be able to contribute to the development of 1,600 new affordable housing units with that county funding. Finally, briefly, the third thing that the task force focused on was community engagement. And the county, through Home for All, has been meeting with all of the cities in the county and has set aside some additional funding to work on a pilot community engagement project. We've had conversations, as I mentioned, with all the cities. We have interest from about 12 of them, and we anticipate giving 3 grants to improve community engagement to cities, probably to be awarded sometime this fall. So we know that that's potentially a long-term initiative, but what we really know is that getting people engaged, getting people involved, participating in planning commission meetings, attending city council meetings, writing letters, sending emails, is what's really going to establish the environment where our local elected officials can support housing projects.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that is a good segue. The grassroots activity that you're hoping to inspire is a good segue to Redwood City Forward and the work that Isabella is doing. If you could talk, Isabella, about some of the challenges that you see that are specific to a city in San Mateo County, and how city policy can be changed to help address some of these issues. That would be great.
Sure. So, I mean, I think Redwood City is a really interesting case because we did have a pretty visionary city council, and they did a lot in the downtown area. And anytime you try to accomplish anything, there's going to be a group of people who are not happy about it. And so when I moved here 3 years ago, I noticed that all of the activity around growth and change was very, I'll just be very honest, older homeowning people from a particular demographic who are very upset. And I thought, you know, there's lots of people who are happy about it. They just are unrepresented. They just walk by and say, oh, a new building, neat, and go on their way. So that was one thing I saw. The other that in my day job, I work at a medical school, and when we think about advancing medicine, we think about evidence. You know, is there evidence that this improves human health? And the other thing we think about is value. And I felt like the conversation really didn't center on evidence and value. It centered on feelings. and opinions. And so I founded Redwood Cities Board to kind of promote evidence-based land use policy and democratize the conversation around how we're going to use our valuable land. This is some of the most valuable land in the world, and thinking about how we're going to build our cities. And so practically, I think some of the best evidence around land use policy is that we have prioritized the car over the person. And the extent to which we can reverse that, or at least price things appropriately, so that driving is priced at what it costs. I think we can start to see our cities improve human health and be better places to live, and that housing will become more affordable if we can prioritize humans over cars. And I'll talk more about that.
Great, thank you. Dawn, what about the private sector? I know as a transportation provider at Samtrans and Caltrain, we're very excited about the private sector's engagement and involvement, and specifically the Peninsula Mobility Group's efforts. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. And I'm no expert, just so I appreciate that kind introduction. As hopefully many of you are familiar, SAMCETA is the San Mateo County Economic Development Association. We have Amanda Hawkins with us representing SAMCETA. It's been around since the 50s as the voice of business, but unlike other organizations around the Bay Area, I think that SAMCETA has always been the voice of coalition and the voice of collaboration. And so it's been about bringing different groups together and leveraging how business can be a part of the solution. So the Managed Lanes project, which some of you may be familiar with, is an effort under Seamus and the transportation agencies along with CCAG and Caltrans to look at how we can extend the HOV lane, which mysteriously ends at about Whipple, and bring that, at least in this first phase of the evaluation, up to 380. SAMCETA was involved with that along with many organizations, both public and private. Out of that came the recognition that private employers are the first to admit that they contribute to the issues of traffic congestion. But at the same time, there's a role that they can play in helping to solve that, and specifically with the case of the Managed Lanes project, provide significant funding towards the environmental phase of that analysis. So you have two very recognizable logos that have given $1.5 million each to help supplement the public dollars that are contributing to the environmental phase of that analysis. These recognizable logos have also contributed to things including the Dumbarton Rail Study and others. So with that, what we've tried to do is create the Peninsula Mobility Group. And it started with lots of these big logos and private employers. And we are expanding that and talking to anyone who will listen to us about how major employers, whether it's SFO or the college district or the county, whether it's Google, Facebook, Genentech, Stanford, can come together and be a part of the solution, both with checkbooks as well as public education campaigns. To Isabella's point, I find that the model of engagement is very 20th century. You know, we have elected officials here who will routinely be faced with, pitchforks and torches from people who don't want change. But you're not going to get someone who thinks downtown Redwood City is a great place, but also has to get dinner on the table for their family, to show up at 7 o'clock and hang out until 9:30 until the agenda item comes in. So what we're trying to do is not only be a part of the solution with the Peninsula Mobility Group and organize the resources of private and public employers, but also to work towards a public education campaign that engages people. And I am so excited about the work that Peggy and Home for All is doing in looking at the new model of engagement. How can we bring new people to the conversation? I mean, I have some specific ideas that are kind of way outside the box, but until we can get 10 people to show up and say yes to match the 10 people that always show up to say no, the outdated model of engagement is going to lead to, to decisions that are always not the highest and best use, whatever that means. And I will often say to people, and I'll end with this, those that want to go back to the traffic of 2009, forget that that was also the housing crisis, and their neighbors' homes were probably in foreclosure, along with their neighbors being out of work. So say what you will about our local economy and the strength and the growth of the companies that have chosen to make San Mateo County home, I don't want to go back to 2009. So I want to focus on how organizations and folks like everyone in this room can work with these major employers to solve our problems, because that's what we do in San Mateo County. We don't have this big city dominating the conversation. We work together and we solve our problems, and that's what we're hoping to do.
Great. Isabella, let me dive into the city decision-making process and some of what cities are grappling with just a little bit more. We know that whatever solutions we come up with that are going to help improve housing affordability, it's going to have to be dependent on a better transit system, a better transit network. We're never going to create a situation where everybody can just wake up, get out of bed, and walk to work. What kind of zoning decisions do you see as being successful in helping to incentivize better connections between housing and transportation?
Sure. So there's a couple pieces. There's a couple pieces. One is zoning, and the other is what we subsidize. So, driving is one of the most subsidized activities we engage in. And at case in point, I can park my big car. I actually own a car. I bike and walk most of the time and take shuttles. But my car can rent 150, 160 square feet for a quarter an hour. And I only have to pay for 9 hours a day. And that works out to $234 a month for 640 square feet. No other use of land, and this is 5 minutes from downtown by foot. No other use of land enjoys that kind of discount. So I think one of the most practical things we can do is, first of all, eliminate parking minimums. That's an artifact of 1950s auto and oil industry driven land use policy, and it has, in my mind, no place in the 21st century in Silicon Valley. And parking minimums directly displace people. There's a ton in the econ and city planning literature on this. It's one of the most studied policies that there is. Pretty much every economist who's looked at it thinks it's a bad idea to have parking minimums. I would say implementing parking caps. If you think about, the cost of driving a 4,000-pound vehicle relative to virtually any other mode of transportation, the costs for that infrastructure are huge, and yet it's the one thing we subsidize the most. We agree that everybody should be able to drive a 4,000 or 5,000-pound car for free. And so, the first thing would obviously be to price parking at what it's actually worth. And then the second thing is upzoning, allowing for density. Again, we have land use policy from the 50s, appropriate to sleepy suburbs, and this is some of the most economically productive land in the world. If you look at the American economy, it's concentrated in cities and increasingly so. And so we need more density, we need high rises, we need smaller setbacks. And then there was two important articles. One was a Lancet article probably a couple months ago where they did a worldwide survey, not a survey. They looked at data for all this, worldwide. And the most powerful predictor of walking was density. And it's also one of the most powerful predictors of transit use, because in order for transit to be economically viable, you need enough people who take it. As long as you make driving cheap and convenient and easy, people will do it. That's rational. So I'd say a combination of pricing driving at what it's actually worth and upzoning and more density.
Great, thank you. Peggy, on the housing and jobs, the Jobs Housing Task Force that created the Home for All effort, what were some of the most promising short-term and long-term solutions that came out of that effort, and where do we start, and what should we be focusing on right away, and then what are the eventual solutions that are going to require a longer-term effort?
Sure. So there are a variety, as I mentioned, of proposals that came out of the task force. And two of the ones that I actually am most excited about that I briefly mentioned before, one of the things that the county has been doing is we've been supporting HIP housing and their home sharing program. It's not been a lot of money. It's been about $300,000 over 2 years. We're going to continue that funding over the next 2 years. But over the past 2 years, HIP and Kate Comfort-Har and her wonderful team have created over 160 new home shares. And that's assisted almost 400 people throughout San Mateo County. When you think about the costs that the county has put forward to new development, we pay about $50,000 a unit for new housing development. For preservation of existing units, our contribution is upwards of $150,000 per unit. For this home sharing initiative, it's about $1,500 a unit. So it's a cheap and easy way to benefit both the people that are sharing the home, who are opening their home, because they get additional income, they also get companionship, potential support, but it also is a low-cost form of housing. One of the other things that we're very excited about is this concept of building more accessory dwelling units, or what you all might call a granny flat or a second unit in your yard. And second units can be both standalone buildings, or they can be a separate unit that is created within an existing house, or say above a garage, or a garage is being converted. Every city and town has their own regulations around second units, but legislation in Sacramento essentially prompted all the cities to take action to update their regulations to make them much, I don't know what the right word is, not looser, but much more accommodating, much more welcoming to second units. Just this morning, I got some wonderful data from our Department of Housing, from Heather Peters. She, through our Housing Innovation Fund, had contracted with the University of California at Berkeley to assess, just for the unincorporated area of San Mateo County, how many lots could accommodate a standalone second unit. And we came up, their data was just provided this morning. There's about 14,000 potential second unit sites just in the unincorporated area of San Mateo County. To help people think more and learn more about second units through Home for All, we are creating an online center, part of our Home for All website, that will include such things as links to all the jurisdictions, who to contact, what sort of regulations exist in each community. We're also going to include a calculator on what's the cost of building, the cost of constructing a second unit versus what the rental income and what the return on that would be to someone. There will be pictures, videos. We really want to get this idea out in the community because we think it has huge potential. Over 2/3 of the housing in San Mateo County is single-family homes, and this is a way to significantly increase housing at a reasonable price point throughout the county by building more second units.
Great. Talking more specifically about transportation a little bit, we're about to start work on the Caltrain electrification project, and that's going to really create a lot of opportunity, not just for people to, it won't just make it easier for people to get to San Mateo County, where a lot of jobs are. It'll also make it more of an incentive for development opportunities in and around our station areas. If we all of a sudden can operate 6 or 7 trains an hour in Redwood City, where today there's 1 or 2 trains an hour, depending on what time of day you want to travel, that's going to make it more desirable to create housing opportunities that can access that transportation. Maybe can each of you talk about some of the opportunities to take advantage of that situation when we are ready to evolve the spine of our transportation system in that way? And Dawn, for you, for employers, what are the opportunities that employers envision as being real benefits from the Caltrain project?
Sure, but before I do that, I want everyone in this room, if you don't appreciate it, to understand that Seamus and an entire organization of people under the leadership of Jim Hartnett and a board of elected officials that all of us know worked tirelessly against an administration that was against this project and delivered $750 million, is how I look at the number, for the electrification of our Caltrain system. And it is an astonishing achievement, and I'm surprised the bags are gone so soon under your eyes, Seamus. I think, to Isabella's point and to Peggy's point, I'm astonished at the idea that there could be 14,000 accessory dwelling units. And thank goodness the legislature stepped in to bring some clarity to that chaos, because otherwise it's a city-by-city process. I want to go get a copy of Dwell magazine and figure out how I can start to sell cool modular homes to be built in the backyards of these 14,000 houses. These private employers, Google doesn't want to run a bus system. Facebook doesn't want to run a bus system, right? And our existing transportation agencies are doing a great job, but they're not structured to necessarily deliver bus service from where people live to where they work. So they are working really hard on that. There is a very exciting express bus study that's being undertaken right now by Samtrans that looks at the idea of adding express bus service in addition to what you know today as the Samtrans service to get people from where they live to where they work. So private employers need more housing. Their workforces are actually getting older. I think we all envision 24-year-olds making $160,000 living in $4,000 apartments in San Francisco, but they're actually going into their 30s. They're moving beyond the smartphone and actually engaging in conversations and falling in love and getting married, and my goodness, they have kids and they want to go to where there are good school districts. So when I think of Caltrain electrification, when I think of the governor's transportation proposal, SB1, we have Mario Rendon from Assemblymember Kevin Mullen's office here. Kevin and Jerry Hill and Mark Berman and our entire delegation work tirelessly to deliver that funding to the state of California, and San Mateo County will benefit from that. We have Alicia Geary, who's our MTC commissioner, and Mayor Kirsten Keith, who is an avid supporter of the Dumbarton Corridor project. Regional Measure 3 is coming up, and that's a potential bridge toll increase on all of the bridges. And so everyone in this room should be asking, what can we do to help ensure that Alicia and Kirsten and others are successful in delivering what's in it for San Mateo County if we're going to have a bridge toll increase? From there's a possibility of a local ballot measure. So what the Caltrain full funding grant agreement underscores for me is that's probably the last check we're going to get out of Washington for a while. And so at a state level, at a county level, at a regional level, we're in this, and we either need to get together as a coalition and be successful and solve our own problems, or we won't be successful.
So I think a couple things. One is to really think about what's realistic and what possible, but realistically possible. So I think that there's this idea that everyone can take transit, and I actually don't think that's probably ever going to be possible to retrofit an entire region that was developed for cars. But what we can do is be really excellent along these corridors. I think about El Camino, for sure, I love Caltrain, I take it all the time. And then certain strategic corridors like the Dumbarton Corridor, et cetera. So just specifically, I think of a few projects. There's the Brisbane Baylands project that's got over 4,000 units of housing proposed. I think we have to let cities know, look, you're part of a community. And not to muscle in on them, I do believe in representation of cities, but the incentives right now are for each city to deny housing, and that's just kind of the way the incentives are structured. And so to really encourage that project to move forward, and as a practical matter, if it's along a transit center, I think we should upzone everything to about 12 stories, but I don't know how politically viable that is.
So let me follow on to what you said and just tell you a little story about why Don and I, and I'm sure Isabel, are so concerned about how people participate in the process and how important it is for all of you who care about the sustainability of our community get involved in whatever way you can. The County of San Mateo has a small area of El Camino, which is in North Fair Oaks, which is an unincorporated area. Our planning department has been working, I would say probably for 18 months, with intensive community engagement to upzone a small section of El Camino. What they're looking at is not enormous, so they'd like to raise the height limits to 5 stories, and what they're proposing is mixed use. And at the community, some of the community meetings they've had, people have been very excited about maybe being able to walk to a coffee shop or have some amenities close by. Well, I went to one of the public meetings where this was being discussed. Actually, Jessica Mullen and I were there to present our Home for All initiative. And I ran into a lovely gentleman who happens to be the nursery school teacher of one of my grandchildren. Wonderful person. And he said, well, why are you here tonight? And I said, well, I'm here to talk about housing and affordable housing and all types of housing. And he said, you know, we really need more housing in San Mateo County. And I said, why are you here tonight? And he said, I'm here to oppose the upzoning along El Camino. So it's understanding, and I think that's one of the key messages of Home for All, is that it's not just us and them. We all are in this together. We as a community, we as a county are going to suffer if we don't do something about our transportation challenges and also our housing challenges.
Thank you. Don, thanks for mentioning the electrification project's challenges in putting together all the funding. And thanks for calling out some of the members in the audience here who I just want to point out were very instrumental in that effort. Alicia Aguirre is an MTC commissioner, helped us navigate the 9-party funding agreement that eventually created the opportunity to electrify Caltrain and move forward with that project. If there's any lessons learned, it's please don't start with a 9-party funding agreement. Try to get that as low as you can. But we, nevertheless, we're able to do that with MTC, really leading the way on that initial effort and being one of the major investors in the project. And if we hadn't been able to secure the federal grant, MTC would have been an even bigger investor. I just want to make sure people understand that behind the scenes, people were rallying to do whatever we needed to do to make sure this project would move forward, regardless of the federal decision. So it's great that we have those resources now that can be invested in other improvements like the ones that we're talking about here. Kirsten has been a great advocate for the Dumbarton corridor improvements. We have a study underway to look at what the opportunities are for improved connections between San Mateo County and the East Bay. That includes the Dumbarton Rail Corridor and the Dumbarton Highway Bridge. And we're looking forward to talking really soon about some of the opportunities short and long term that exist on that corridor. And then our state representatives, Mario representing Assemblymember Mullen's office, and Jeffrey Liu is here from Senator Hill's office, and both of those members were instrumental in helping us move the ball on Caltrain electrification. Senator Hill was responsible for the initial investment, legislative appropriation of high-speed rail money in that project, and then AB 1889, which Assemblymember Mullen authored for us last year, allowed that funding to actually be allocated to the project, which is something that we are working on right now. We have a bank account ready to receive it, and as soon as those bonds are sold, they'll be delivered to the project and will be underway. So thanks for all of your efforts. I wanted to open it up to questions, but first, if I can just maybe ask the panelists, Peggy, you talked about how people can get engaged and how that's a major push that the Home for All initiative has. Can you expand on that a little bit more, and then maybe each of you can talk about the work that you're doing and how members of the audience can help facilitate those efforts and help make some progress in those areas?
Sure. Thanks so much, Dennis. I'm glad to have that opportunity. So Carrie and TJ, could you raise your hands? Carrie and TJ work in our Office of Sustainability. They've put together the table in the back of the room, and there are lots of ways that you can participate. From something so simple as taking one of our cards on the back table and visiting our website, signing up for our newsletter, following us on Twitter, sharing all that information with all your friends and all your networks. If you belong to a service club, a congregation, a book club, any type of group that might be interested in a presentation on housing, let us know. We'd be happy to come to talk to you about the challenge that we're all facing, but most importantly, the types of solutions that we all need to work together on to address this important issue. And then finally, as I said before, if you can personally get involved by thinking about home sharing, HIP Housing. Their website has a lot of information on that, and we will let you know if you're interested as soon as our second unit center on our website is available, if that's something you're interested in pursuing also.
So a few things. One is I'd like to expand how we think about engagement, and this is kind of wearing a research hat. Researchers are increasingly getting away from volunteers and surveys, and the reason for that is the kinds of people who volunteer and who fill out surveys are very different from the rest of the population, so you can't make inferences on the population from survey data. And I would say that council meetings and people like me are the epitome of a biased sample. And I think what we really have to start looking at as leaders and as council members and other kinds of activists is, what do people do? I think you can infer far more about preferences from behavior than you can from vote. Well, voting is important, but who shows up to meetings, who writes letters, etc. Those are the outliers. That said, I think one of the most powerful things we can do is get people under 50 to vote. And so one of the things that Redwood City Forward would like to do is just have tables at events and things like that, and just register our new residents to vote. I think it's very important that they participate in our democracy. And then the third thing is, I don't know that we necessarily have to reach every person, but in my experience, leaders are very receptive to facts, data, and evidence. And I think the extent to which we can just help our leaders have that support and that encouragement is probably one of the most powerful things we can do after we elect them.
I would say until we change the outdated model of engagement, go to your city clerk's website, sign up to receive the agenda for your planning commission and your city council. And when you get that email, look at it. Look for something that matters to you. Look for something that you can support. Angry people show up to say no. Satisfied, happy people stay home and cook dinner. Yep. So the emails get read. The speakers get listened to. They can't respond to what you have to say. But if all the angry people show up and none of the happy people show up, then the happy people at some point will realize the angry people won.
Great. So I have some questions from the audience here, and a couple of these are for me, I think. One is that not everyone wants to live on El Camino. What plans are being considered to enhance east-west transportation? And it's a really important point because even though most of our demand is commuter-based, and we're seeing both on the rail and the bus side and on the highway that people are interested in moving north-south to be able to get from where they live to where they work. We still have a need to be able to provide opportunities to connect east-west, and we know from a first last mile standpoint, all of that activity really occurs on an east-west basis. So transportation agencies, transit agencies in particular, are being asked to evolve more quickly than they ever have before. Anybody who's paying attention knows that there's a trend right now for declining ridership for bus services specifically. Caltrain is an outlier. Caltrain is like no other system in the world really, because it's bidirectional, because of the market that exists for Caltrain service. But Samtrain service is more of a known quantity, and agencies have not evolved fast enough to deal with competition from the transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, who are in a price war right now and a battle for users. And so they're constantly undercutting each other, and people who are making east-west trips, a lot of the time they're faced with the decision to ride the bus, which might take longer, or use an Uber or a Lyft, which is not much more expensive and definitely takes a shorter amount of time. So we're in the process of identifying opportunities to refine our service, make service changes to eliminate some of the underperforming service that exists today, and then use that savings to add in new services that we know are going to be appealing for key markets. And we don't want to do that in a way that strands people who are using the service already, and we want to make it more attractive for those folks. So some things that we're considering are more on-demand type service. We have some pilot programs that we've launched recently in Pacifica and one in San Carlos, and we learned some lessons about what doesn't work, but we're not ready to give up on the on-demand type service. If we can teach transit agencies to perform more like Lyft and an Uber service, but do it in a way that's affordable and gives people more options, that's a goal that we should have. So that's one thing that we're looking at to make sure that we're competing and keeping up with the convenience factor that some of these new options are creating. And there are some other changes on the horizon too, and I think the key message is we used to look at our transit system maybe once a decade and make major changes throughout the entire county to respond to an evolution that happens slowly, and now we're learning that we have to do this on an ongoing basis. We can't just sit back and accept that our existing routes are the right routes that need to be out there. We should be taking every opportunity we have multiple times a year to make changes that respond to demand. And we want to do more partnering. One of the recent successes that we had is with the San Carlos, City of San Carlos, and the school district in San Carlos and Belmont, where we partnered with the PTA there and the schools and the city and rolled out a new service, and they really worked to market it to their students and to get students using it, and we saw full buses on day one, and we actually had to add in service, and it's continued to be really popular. So can we focus on some of those key markets like youth and seniors, where we know that transit is going to be an attractive option? Those are all things that we're working on at SamTrans and things that are in our strategic plan. The other question that came up is, we spoke a lot today on affordable housing, but what's being done on affordable transportation? Prices for public transit continue to increase, so how can we ensure that people have access to basic needs, such as getting groceries or getting to school or work? This is something that's really close to home right now, especially because we're going through a public outreach process right now around a proposal to increase fares on Caltrain. And we're doing that because Caltrain is unique, not just in a good way that we have a lot of demand, but it's also unique in a bad way in that we don't have any dedicated funding for operations. We're dependent on voluntary contributions from our 3 member agencies, and those member agencies have Caltrain as a second or a third priority. So we don't always make the cut, and when we don't make the cut, we have to look at cuts to our operating budget, and we know we can't do that at a time when ridership demand is at an all-time high. So the only way to pay for the maintenance of that service and expansion of that service is to look at the fare box, unfortunately, right now. And when we do that, we know there's an opportunity to revise our fare structure in a way that insulates some of those vulnerable populations from those increases. It's going to take a lot of work to get it right, but we have a comprehensive fare study that is just in the middle of the work that they're doing. We'll have results and findings and recommendations out by the end of the year, and one of the specific tasks that they have is to identify opportunities for a means-based fare structure, some sort of equity-based fare to make sure that systems like Caltrain and SamTrans are accessible to everybody and affordable to everybody, regardless of income qualifications. So it's something the region is looking at too, but it's more urgent on a system like Caltrain, given the funding demands that we have and the cost of doing business for a commuter rail agency than it is on other systems around the region. So we are looking at those options. Next question is, do you think redevelopment authorities will ever return to help facilitate changes in land use? Peggy, you might be closest to that situation if you want to take a shot at it.
You know, I think it's unfortunate. It was an important source of funding for affordable housing. Those of you who all may know, 20% of all the tax increment from redevelopment agencies had to be dedicated to affordable housing. Interestingly enough, we've done some recent research on that, and the amount of money that the county is going to be contributing to affordable housing over the next 2 years slightly exceeds the amount that have been put in by all the cities. So what we know is we need a variety of sources of money. I don't think redevelopment agencies as we knew them in the past are going to come back, but we are certainly hopeful that Sacramento can figure out another alternative and another way to support affordable housing throughout California.
So we are out of time. I want to just take an opportunity to thank our panelists for participating. Lots of great information shared. I want to remind folks about Adrian's pitch that we are having celebrating the 25th anniversary of Sustainable San Mateo County. We do have a funding and fundraising effort associated with that, so please do participate in that if you can. And Adrian, I think you wanted to make some closing comments.
So thank you, Seamus, for moderating all of our panelists. Let's give them one more round of applause. So I just wanted to, in closing, mention that a couple of the things that were mentioned about ways that you can get involved, we are going to be doing our best to help bring those to our audiences as well. So we are participating in the Home for All program, and we are going to be sharing some of those messages and opportunities to get out through our channels. So if you're not already, please sign up for our email list or follow us on Facebook or Twitter. We hope you'll connect with us and help to elevate our voices in those conversations as we're making decisions for the future of our community. So thank you all for being here. We hope you'll participate in our campaign. And I know we had a bunch of questions that we didn't get to, so if our panelists are all up for it, maybe we'll see if we can get some answers to those and send those out in some follow-up. We also had Rick here capturing today's event for us, so we'll share that as well. If you liked what you heard, I hope you'll share it as well. Have a great afternoon, and thank you all for being here.